This is Lorna Spencer. She is, among other things, a lawyer.
Enough with the character assassination.
But she's also what's called a master gardener.
Mm-hmm.
And master gardeners are people that take a 16-week, 17-week class from Maricopa County Extension Service.
That's right.
I refer to you a lot of times. Go to the Extension Service to find out information.
Right.
All the answers to all of your questions is usually it's your soil.
Yep.
It's the most critical thing to get going and be healthy for everything to grow.
Yes.
And so listen up.
The thing to remember is that soil preparation should be the focus of your gardening. Everyone gets excited about it's time to run to the nursery and pick out seedlings and start planting stuff. Before you do any of that, focus on your soil. What everyone has to remember about soil structure is that soil is essentially 50% solids and 50% water and air. So of the solids, we're talking mineral particles and we're talking organic matter. But it's usually about 46% of mineral particles and the rest organic matter. Given our climate here in Arizona, the key to success in your garden is going to be digging in a healthy amount of organic matter prior to each planting season. Meaning, all these plants we have in for the fall were heavy nitrogen feeders. So most of us dug in a lot of composted manure prior to planting, and during the course of the growing season, a lot of people also were applying fish emulsion, which is a heavy nitrogen containing fertilizer, and it's an organic fertilizer. We use organic fertilizers here, and you should also carry that practice over to your home gardens if you have them, because we tend towards having alkaline soils. So the inorganic things like Miracle-Gro contain salts that will build up in the soil and ultimately kill your plants off and create a condition in your soil that is not healthy for the actual soil structure. When I talk about soil structure, you want your soil to be the classic rich, well-draining, and water retentive, which sounds bizarre. However, there are things that you do to make sure that happens, because your plants have to have space around their roots in terms of air space to be able to successfully uptake the nutrients in your bed. This season is going to be a season for the warm weather goods, meaning summer squash, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, a lot of the more Mediterranean or summertime vegetables that you would plant in deep summer elsewhere. Like in Michigan and New York, you have to wait till the first frost is over before you even think about planting tomatoes and tender goods, because the frost will kill them. Here, we used to be able to plant tomatoes starting, say, February 15th and then through March 15th. My recommendation is to plant them February 15th to about the end of the month, because we have had some bananas weather. Like this year was horrible. This looked like a moonscape because it was just so hot. We had over 50 days of above 110 degrees. So by the time July hits here at this garden, the things that you're going to see in beds are going to be okra, eggplants, basil, and chili peppers. Hot peppers can surf through the summer, and we do use shade cloth here because we have no cover for our western exposure. The western exposure is what fries plants. So part of keeping your plants healthy and able to tolerate these extremes is by preparing your soil. So Terry has gotten us composted manure for this season, and also we have compost. Those are things that I expect everyone to dig into their beds, probably at a depth of, I want to say, 3 to 4 inches on top of the soil. But what we're going to encourage you to do to activate the things in your bed that your plants need is to dig your beds and turn your beds. So when you yank out your spring plantings, when these are done, some people leave the roots in. If you have space to do it, you can on some of the more shallow rooted things. I tend to remove my roots just because I usually have honking big plants, and thick roots. But some people, if you have a bigger space, leave the roots in because you have mycelia and other, other bacteria that are in your bed that are going to help the next group of plants to use, again, the nutrients in the bed. But we want you digging down to the bottom of your bed and turning the soil. The other thing too is you may encounter some grubs that you'd like to know that you take the grubs out and feed them to our chickens here so that the grubs don't hatch into something that later eats your plants, right? But you're going to turn your beds and then throw in the soil amendments. And when I talk about soil amendments, I'm talking about things that are designed to improve the soil structure. Again, manure, compost, bone meal. We also use that sometimes as an organic fertilizer and source of calcium. You'll hear a lot about blossom end rot in tomatoes, and I know Melissa's going to cover that later this month when she brings her tomatoes, that sometimes calcium and magnesium are implicated in blossom end rot, meaning there's not enough of them. But the other thing that causes your tomatoes to have blossom end rot, and I'm talking about that black spot on the blossom end of your tomato, is in irregular watering and insufficient watering. When you put in things like seedlings here, the best answer after your seedlings are established, and if you don't have loose seeds in the bed, is to actually use buckets to water and water deeply. You can water less frequently if you water deeply. The other answer is to plant your plants more closely. We typically don't plant rows here because you're not going to stand in the bed with a hoe to cultivate it. You're going to use hand tools. So if you plant something along, I plant on a square foot spacing method so that the leaves, as they grow, shade the soil, which also prevents evaporation, right? So, and I also deploy things like lots of basil seeds throughout my beds. In the wintertime, I use radishes. You can still use radishes, but they're on the way out towards April. They'll get too hot to eat, really. They'll taste like wasabi, basically, or horseradish. The hotter it gets, the volatile oils will get sharper. So we use things to cover the soil. Some people apply mulch, right? They use straw to mulch around their plants, which also helps conserve the moisture in the bed. And the reason I'm talking about keeping your soil moist is that it will speed your plant growth, but it also keeps the bacteria that help your plants, the healthy bacteria in your beds, working to provide nutrients for your plants. The other addition that I typically use in the summer garden is magnesium sulfate, right? Epsom salts. Not the one with lavender and whatever else, but actual Epsom salts are good because your plants need nutrients in addition to the standard nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK that we see on the fertilizer bag. They need certain trace nutrients, and magnesium is one of them. Magnesium, calcium, iron sometimes. So by using the magnesium sulfate is like a gateway drug for your plants, in that when you mix that into the bed, your plants then can uptake, again, the other nutrients more effectively, especially for the nightshades. The tomatoes, the peppers, and the eggplants do very well with that. The other thing I want everyone to consider when you're picking things to plant, pick short season varieties. Because things are going to get so hot so quickly, you really want to be able to get a crop in before our insanity level heat hits, like the inferno hits in July. And there are certain plants that you can plant that have a more flexible planting window. That's why I handed out planting calendars for everyone, so that you have an idea of what to plant behind your next crop, right? Because this is the spring summer season, so we do a soil preparation at this point, but we'll also do another soil prep probably around July to prepare for the monsoon plantings. And again, the same thing. When your tomatoes are trashed or whatever you've grown is not doing too great, you can plant certain things at the end of the summer for the monsoon. Tomatoes, again, you can plant beans, you can plant squash, you can plant corn. Again, and things that are heavy feeders are going to require, again, that you dig in more organic material. Always look to get, try a new something every year. But what I also encourage everyone to do is to take notes as to what you did, so that when you do get a good result, you say, well, what went into that, right? Especially with your soil preparation. But I really think you can't go wrong. The more compost you use, now I say also composted manure, because the tomatoes and things like that are going to be heavy feeders. You want to get them up and out quickly. Also because we have issues with squash bugs here that descend on us like the heathen spawn that they are right around June. So we try to get the zucchinis and the summer squash in quickly because, and as a part of integrated pest management, we want to get things planted, and sometimes we plant things at specific times to avoid specific pests. This year we were fortunate in that we had cold weather. for a period of time, which hopefully nuked a lot of those seed, or a lot of those eggs rather, that would have overwintered. But we have had some issues with that. So part of why I encourage people to really be diligent about soil preparation is that the healthier your plants are, the more they're going to be able to resist pests and disease. And when your plants, if your plants do start to look sketchy, or something really takes hold here, we encourage you to remove those plants. If they're struggling, yank it. The reason being that sometimes what starts out as a small problem can multiply and become a really big problem if it's not controlled at the basic at the bed level. Basically, if we see something that's not looking right, we may say like, oh, it's infested with, we have spider mites here, sometimes we get the squash bugs. Obviously, we're just coming out of caterpillar season, so we don't have that really going on right now. But focus on soil preparation and making sure that your soil is loose and crumbly. The other cautionary thing I would say to you is do not work your soil when it's wet. If you take a handful of your soil and it remains balled up, wait a couple of days for your bed to dry out before you start digging in it. The reason being, you can damage your soil structure by working wet soil, especially true if you have a lot of clay in any of your beds. That silty sort of sticky earth needs, again, to be broken up with organic matter, but after it's dried out, because I know we just had a rain. So check your soil and see how it is. What I don't encourage people to do is things like, like really hosing down your bed or getting it soggy and then digging it. Dig it first, dig in your nutrients, and then put water on your bed, not in the opposite direction, right? The thing to remember too is that when you're preparing the soil in your beds, I encourage everyone to think about a soil prep like how you should be eating, right? You want things that give you immediate nutrition when you're hungry, but you want something that's got a little bit of a slower feed rate. So when you put a bed together, I personally mix in the compost or the composted manure. I add some of the organic granulated fertilizer that we keep here into the bed. And I also, like when I planted the bed directly behind you, I used a bit of worm castings mixed with some Epsom salts into each hole for the seedling. So that gave them an instant takeoff, right? To get them established. So think about that when you put your beds together so that you can cut down a little bit on the fertilizing during the course of the growing season if you have enough stuff in it. Does anyone have any specific issues about soil prep or things that you need to know? Yes?
How much Epsom salt would you put in each hole for a transplant?
I put like a couple of teaspoons, not a whole lot, but remembering it's not salt, it's magnesium sulfate. Yes?
And so I started pulling those out to try to prevent them from interfering with the rest of the stuff that I was planning on growing.
Yes.
And so I should keep continuing to pull that, right?
Absolutely, because those are the stolons of the Bermuda grass, which is from hell. Bermuda grass will be attracted to anything you irrigate. Bermuda grass can go under the ground to the depth of like a foot and then will invade your beds. So the other answer you may have is if you've got that black landscaping cloth under it, you may want to peel it back a little bit, dig out ask for some help from the volunteers here, dig out those stolons and then put a piece of this we have like old campaign signs and things that's even more effective weed barrier, because the Bermuda grass can get through the landscaping cloth eventually. It will pierce through that stuff. That's the other piece too, is that weeds, when weeds pop up, yank them, because those are competing with your plants for nutrients. So whenever you see them, get them out. Yes?
You mentioned 3 to 4 inches of organic matter.
Yes.
So when we're prepping our bed, we need to put in like the manure, the compost, the minerals.
Yeah.
About 3 inches deep and stir it all up.
Well, turn it first. Take your stuff out, dig it up, and then take that bag of compost that was purchased for your bed and the manure. And if you want to put more in, grab some compost from back here and then turn the bed. And you can throw the fertilizer in at that time too. And then turn the whole thing and rake it level and you're good to go.
Do you ever bury like thick sticks or small logs to have long-term nutrients?
I don't, because the time it takes to break down a log, you're talking like hugelkultur. A lot of people do that at home and build like almost looks like a mound with logs at the bottom and then layer it. These beds, because we're arid, we don't have the kind of moisture that would help you have that decomp on those logs, for one. And two, when you put things like raw wood into a bed or other nitrogen containing things that need to decompose, you pull nitrogen from the bed to help the decomp. So it may actually cause your soil fertility to go down, right? So you want it to, you kind of want to, these are very fun to grow in, these beds, because they're easy to control. It's easy to control the mix that you're putting in your bed. And over a period of seasons, your soil will get better and better if you keep taking care of it. I usually buy them from the nursery because they sell a brand of worm casting that has also the trace minerals in it. I use them, I mean, I do like industrial gardening at home with big rolling garbage bins full of mixes. So when I'm planting and potting up seedlings, I include some worm castings in that too, so that they can stay in those 3-inch pots a little bit longer. But they sell like a 10-pound bag of worm castings at the various nurseries, like Whitfill sells them, Summer Winds up on Bell Road sells them. I just use them because, especially with the nitrogen requiring vegetables like all these brassicas, it really gives them a boost and keeps them green.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
the Arizona Worm Farm.
Oh, that too, down on Baseline. Yep.
And you can look on the bag. I think it says who manufactures it.
Mm-hmm.
You could do that. It's
Yeah.
it's all a little on the expensive side.
Yeah, I mean,
It takes a long time to make a bag of.
yeah, I mean, there's a white, the one that I buy usually is in a white bag, and it also has things like azomite in it, but I buy azomite separately too to use in some of my mixes, which is a powder that contains trace minerals for growing stuff. Yeah. Right.
As I was digging up the roots, I came across worms/caterpillars about the size of this.
Yes,
really
a big
chubby,
white,
round.
thick grub. Yes. The chickens,
they?
there's a grub. It's one of the moths. I think it's, frequently it's the, I think it's, yes, it's the sphinx moth, otherwise known as the tomato hornworm generator, or one of those, but I think it is the sphinx, or the white, maybe it's the white line sphinx. But no, that one turns out differently. But
Get one.
just feed them to the chickens.
The girls back there.
Oh, they love them. The chickens love them. In one of these 4x8s, I say try to get it within about an inch of the top rail. You're going to experience settling during the course of the growing season because your plants are actually using the nutrients in the bed. So you'll see the level of the soil will go down. So we also have potting soil here, which you can use to boost the volume in your bed. And that potting soil does contain organic matter in the form of peat moss. The trick with that is making sure that you blend it in very well into your bed, because peat moss in this climate has a tendency to crust. So if you don't mix it all the way in, you may get a fine crust over your bed after you water it. But if you get it in there, it'll be fine, and keep it moist. Because as you water it and as the plants grow, you'll see the top of the bed will start to go down. And sometimes you get stuff that's, the compost isn't really finished, or it's a bit chunky in texture. Like when you look at mixes in the nurseries, like you go to Home Depot and you see some of the stuff out, you're like, you know you're gonna need something that's a bit finer, because your plants will have an easier time of it. That stuff will break down eventually, but you don't need eventually, you need now.
Lorna, how long do you just let it sit there? A week?
Okay.
2 weeks? 10 days?
I let it sit, well, I usually dig a bed, and then after I've dug the bed, I water it, let it settle, and come back the next day and plant it. The real thing is just after you've dug it, rake it level. That's the other piece. When you're planting, especially seedlings, rake your bed in a way that will pull the water around your planting area, right? So that you don't want your bed like this, so the water all runs out one side of the bed. You want it evenly raked, and then you can create small impressions where you put the seedlings, so that when you water, they get the water they should, right? You retain the water.